Hello and welcome to ELT Under the Covers Crumbs on the Sheets, where we take a broader look at the education, learning, and teaching industry community, and we go a little bit more in depth into topics that are on our minds and have been suggested by you, our viewers. But first, introductions. I'm Neil of NeilTeacher.
Hello everybody, it's ProfRich.
Okay, today, Rich, I thought one of the things that we could talk about that has been picking up a lot of steam, especially with new technology, and I mean, it's always been around, but now it's kind of become more prominent, is gamification. Now, it's something that I've used a lot because I previously did a lot of the kind of PowerPoint based lessons in China, and there was lots of elements of gamification in that. And with teaching young kids, there's also a lot of gamification, but it also came more closer to home to me in terms of a parent, because my son that's currently in reception, he's had a lot of his, not lessons, because he doesn't really have lessons per se. A lot of his activities, school time, has been gamified via an app called Class Dojo. I don't know if have you heard of that?
Yes, I think I used that about 5 years ago in Spain. That's where they all have like little avatars,
Yep,
right?
monsters.
Yeah, they have little monster avatars. Yeah, I remember that. The kids used to love designing their avatar.
Yeah, my eldest, he loves designing his avatar, his monster, and nowadays they actually have a thing where you design the monster, but they actually have like a game world, kind of imagine like a Roadblock stroke Minecraft without kind of the building element. They just kind of walk their avatar around this kind of island and collect coconuts. But he really enjoys that. However, he can kind of upgrade and change his avatar with monster points, and he gets monster points from by doing for like good behavior or activities they want to and actions they want to encourage. For example, cleaning up, sitting crisscross applesauce, doing reading, like coming to it's actually, we kind of get puts on us because he gets monster points if he's read at home and his book has been filled out, and obviously he can't fill the book out because he's like 4 years old, so it's kind of like we're trying to earn the monster points for him. That's kind of funny.
So when you say wait, when you say fill the book out, does this mean he does something and you sign it to say he's done it? Or do you mean
Oh yeah, so all right, so he comes home with a book every day, and we kind of read the book with him, and then we write down what pages that we've read, and kind of like a little journal of what we've done with him, what we focused on that with him, and then when they see that's filled out, they give him monster points. I'll just give you my quick thoughts with it. It's been interesting, but it's also, we have our own kind of point system at home that we try to stick with. So we kind of gamified our house as well, just because it's difficult to provide a structured framework for encouraging things that you want, and to discourage things that you don't want. He gets points for washing his hands and stuff like that, and those points he uses to accumulate, and we can get a treat or a toy or something like that, and
right?
it's easier than kind of, and it gives us a frame of reference for kind of discipline, and it's easier than kind of trying to, the idea of trying to catch them in a good moment and then heap praise on them, or trying to kind of, is more difficult because you kind of got to be a lot more switched on, and as you will, as people know, the more kids that you have, the more it's like spinning plates. So it's hard to kind of like catch that one kid doing something, that thing that you like, and then kind of heaping praise on them to keep encourage them to do that, to use that psychology. But also it kind of does, and my always down point with the gamification of just generally is that it kind of will take away from the learning process, in that they only want to learn or do the thing to get the point, to get the reward, rather than to the idea being that you would get this to get to a level where you get some sort of intrinsic reward. So with learning, you get the satisfaction of actually being able to, speak a new language, or, like do an action. It becomes a little bit more difficult when it's like wash your hands, because you're like, well, where's my intrinsic reward for washing my hands? Because it's not like you like, oh, today I'm healthy and not dying of dysentery. It's kind of hard for a 4-year-old to get their head around that. But I'm interested to kind of get your thoughts as well on like my situation, but also your experiences with gamification as well.
Yeah, well, we could start by talking about that key criticism, which is something that Elizabeth Kentman, who is the CPD manager at British Council Hanoi while I was there, called it Pavlovian motivation. This was the idea that we're training students like Pavlov's dogs. And her perspective was very much that it was all about the innate reward. She wasn't totally against point systems, but she discouraged using them, and they were just there kind of a if needed situation, which contrasted heavily with Kevin Chan, who was coordinator there at the time, and he was massively, and I believe still is massively, into gamification. I had some very interesting conversations with him about it. In fact, we can talk about something very, very interesting that he did once we get off critique. I'll tell you about that. It's a way of sort of taking the gamification to another level beyond just points. So there's this Pavlovian critique, and there's a few things which come out of that. One of them is reward dependency. So it's the idea of what happens when you stop the reward. Like, is there a question of when we stop the reward for washing your hands, does that mean that your son is no longer going to wash his hands? What we might find is that although the reward encouraged the behavior to begin with, that by repeating the action, we start to discover something that is innately rewarding about the task. And therefore, it fosters a natural interest in the task. So I don't know how you feel about hands and dirty hands, but for me, I get a very horrible feeling when I have dirty hands. And when I have clean hands, they feel nice, So if I know that I need to wash my hands, it's kind of like I almost feel like they're glowing with dirtiness, and I need to like get that off. And I'm pretty sure that is trained. I'm pretty sure that it's not just a natural instinct to feel like that. So, because kids don't seem to. So could this Pavlovian motivation eventually enable the discovering of those kinds of feelings, similar to the idea of if your teeth feel like, you need to brush them? And obviously, again, that's not innate because some people don't brush their teeth and don't care.
Yeah.
And other people, they'll eat a cake and an hour later, they'll just feel this desperate need to brush their teeth. I have to brush my teeth right now. They feel so bad. I cannot possibly sleep with my teeth like this, for example. So we could say that this Pavlovian motivation is something that at least can help people discover the innate motivation of a task. Then there's some other things about it, like what about the manipulation angle? This is something that might be less relevant with small children, where basically can we ever not manipulate small children? I know that sounds very negative, but is it actually possible to just allow small children to be completely in their natural state without any kind of manipulative, let's say, guidance from an authority figure?
But they need it. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No, we can discuss at points, whatever. Yeah, I mean, there is some manipulation to it. And then what about with adults? So could there be a question that if I need to use Pavlovian motivation to get someone to study calculus, should they really be studying calculus? It gets onto kind of higher educational theories about studying for necessity versus studying what we really feel completed by, what is really part of our path. So there's that.
I think we could pass a couple of those points off, because I think that there's some distinctions that we can make, because especially with the training of the habit that kind of comes with gamification, and the idea of, well, you take away that reward, then what happens? Does the action stop? Do they stop doing that? And I think that can actually be taken and parsed out in two ways that I found more so from parenting than from teaching. One being that if you're a parent and you start something early enough, then it kind of just becomes and you give a reward, it just, and they just do it again and again and again and again and again, and then you stop. Often they don't even cognitively think about it. They just like there's like a disc skip, but they still do the action. And what really kind of I've got two illustrations for this. One is when we started really early brushing teeth for Win, and every night since he was like a year old, we'd have different varieties of toothbrush. Like it starts off with like a finger puppet kind of thing that you just kind of put in. He's not brushing any teeth or anything like that, but he's just accustomed to it. And we would do that, and when he would do that, we would give him loads of rewards as how amazing, and lots of praise, blah 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 blah. And then when he would stay over with his grandparents, if they forgot, like years later, because we didn't let them stay over for a long time until they were a bit older, he would tell them, he would be like, oh, we've got to brush the teeth, and they would forget. And it was because it was just a habit that had formed at that point. And that was incredibly useful. And to contrast that, we also did this thing called baby-led weaning, where we want to kind of start our kids early with feeding themselves. They choose the food. We just kind of choose. We make it so it's not palatable for them, but it's safe for them to eat. Like you cut up the grapes and the cherry tomatoes, and you give them bite-sized stuff, and
Right.
yada yada. But also with Win, what we did was we also did purees as well. So we would like feed him a puree, and then we'd also give him something for him to to choose from and eat. we went straight into just choosing to and feeding themselves without the puree for Raina, and that was more difficult when we were like later on we're like, oh, actually we should probably give him some purees as well, and then he didn't want to do that. He wanted to feed himself, so we kind of shot ourselves in the foot by not doing the puree feeding little bits alongside the baby led weaning, because when by the time that we wanted to introduce that, he'd already got so accustomed to just feeding himself that we wouldn't accept any food, like being fed to him. He wanted to use the spoon and feed himself.
Why is that a problem?
Because a 1-year-old holding a spoon doesn't always get all the food in their mouth.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, so
and that didn't autocorrect.
No, and it still doesn't autocorrect.
Really?
Yeah, no, because it takes time, because there's motor actions involved with that, and there's also the kind of like it's coming towards your mouth, coming towards the mouth. Wait, this is interesting. Wait, hold on. Hey, if I do that, it drops. So it starts to kind of become not just, it looks like it's going to be food, and then it gets closer and it becomes something else. It becomes an interesting thing. And,
Oh.
you know what I mean? It becomes an exploratory thing when it should be just a food
Go
thing.
in the mouth.
Yeah, and you kind of we were trying to balance kind of making sure that they've got nutrients and calories coming in, along with kind of just becoming comfortable with different textures and food and stuff like that.
Right.
So that was kind of that one side of it just kind of becoming a trained habit, but also on another part that we could pass off is when it's kind of older people, not necessarily students, is when they have that kind of gamification. Like I've got a Fitbit. I'm part of. I've got apps that kind of rank me, with doing fitness stuff. I've got stuff like Duolingo that give me, I'm on a streak and you're beating this person in this league with this many points.
Duolingo is a good example of gamification.
Yeah, it kind of keeps you going, and especially with the fitness stuff, what I found for myself is, I would never really consider myself a sporty or fit person. So when I started to get into that, like years back, that really helped. And now it's kind of like we've talked about before with the atomic habits, is that it's kind of, I've done it for so long now, and although I still enjoy the rewards, I feel if you were to take that away, I would still carry on with doing the sports and the fitness stuff without the rewards, because now I see an intrinsic value to it, because I feel the difference in my body between before, when I was unfit, to now where I am fit, and I notice the difference. I notice the difference between, I'm 40 and I come back to England, and I see my friends from school and stuff like that, and I'm like, Jesus, you're struggling to get up and down stairs. I'm like, yeah, maybe I could have gone down that way. So by doing that action, especially if it's something that you're learning that's going to be beneficial to you, and it is, I don't want to say scientifically proven, but it seems it is a benefit to you, then I think once you've kind of if you utilize gamification to kind of get you doing this thing to eventually get to that benefit, because maybe this thing is quite difficult to do, once you get to that benefit and you stop, you're like, well, I've not got that reward that I have from the gamification, but I've got the final benefit of the thing that I was doing. And like Duolingo, it might be the case that you stop doing Duolingo, but then you've got a kind of level of language where you can kind of at least do directions or something like that. With Fitbit and all that kind of running club stuff, maybe you stop doing that, but now you're kind of fitter, you're healthier, you look better. You can pick up your kids. You can look better than your school friends and stuff like that. Whatever it is that you take from it, so there'll be something else. But you have to. It's good to utilize gamification when you're going through a tough process. But that at the end of that tough process, there is like an inherent reward, where you can kind of switch over onto.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my parsing of it.
I think that,
and kind of an unobtained reward that happens when you drop the gamification aspect.
I think that is a cast iron argument for some benefit from gamification. And the question then is, to what extent should we use it? And is there such a thing as overuse, I suppose, is where we get to then. Because at that point, we're accepting that. And I think you can't argue against the fact that gamification can lead to positive things. I mean, that's a perfect example that someone goes through a kind of gamified process of sports and then starts to realize the intrinsic value of sports, because it's not necessarily clear that running, for example, is ever going to be that beneficial or enjoyable. If you're horribly out of shape, then in fact running is incredibly unpleasant. And even if you get a little buzz from it, it's not going to compare to how horribly unpleasant it is. But then if you do it again and again and again, start to get fitter and healthier and run faster and get a bigger kind of a bigger endorphin dump from it as well, then you'll start to realize those intrinsic benefits. And if some sort of Pavlovian motivator can be used to encourage that, then 100% there's a benefit there. We can't doubt that. However, the question is then, what are the limitations of it? And at what point does it become too much? So one of the things that people talk about is the idea of competition, and how if you're at the bottom of the leaderboard, then why bother anymore?
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that with my classes where they're like, they get so far behind on kind of like the competition that they just kind of give up, and then that the whole purpose of having the point system of kind of for classroom management goes out the window, because those were the students that you were aimed at trying to encourage to get the points, so you can utilize that point system as a classroom management technique. My thing with that was that I was the screwy referee. There were rules to it, but I was teaching little kids, so it was it just so happened they got to hit the special star that got them, to catch them back up and all that sort of stuff. I'd rig games. I would. Yeah. If any of my students are grown up now and watching this, yes, it was rigged. I screwed you over, but it was for your own good.
It's funny, that actually seems to be a very common way of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Is to make it screwy like that, one way or another, whether it's, offering the bonus game, which suddenly has more points available to someone else, or in one way or another rigging it to keep it competitive. That definitely is one of the ways to respond to that potential problem.
Yeah, it especially helps if you have a game where it's like kind of like do you remember that game on TV, Deal or No Deal, where they just open random boxes and inside, there's random points and there's no skill involved at all. It's just kind of luck.
It's still massive. It's still on TV every day.
Oh, is it?
People love that.
I don't watch TV.
It's still massive. Yeah, well, it's a good thing.
Anything
not to watch TV.
gamification, but it's just kind of like random luck that you can kind of change. Then that it's not skill based. I think works best because it's just kind of like
Right.
they get just chances to get lucky rather
So I
than
think
a skill
because you,
working its way through it.
yeah, because you brought this up, I think it'd be worthwhile me talking about Kevin Chan's the way that he would do his points in his class,
Okay.
because it relates to this idea of randomness and skill. And so what he would do is he give points, and the points translated into dice rolls.
I see where this is going already.
Yeah. So basically, you would earn points, and then at intervals in the class, you get to use the points by rolling a dice, and the dice was something on the interactive whiteboard where the kids would get the pen and come up and dunk, and then it kind of has this animation of a rolling dice. It's quite pleasing to do it.
Yeah.
And basically, it could just be one dice or two dice or 10 dice, It's lots of dice, basically. So they really wanted to get those points because they knew if they got loads of points, that gives them a chance to roll the dice. And rolling the dice, obviously, super exciting, but massively random as well. Like if you're rolling 10 dice, you could get 60 points or you could get 6 points. Like there's a huge, and those were like the final points. That was the final points to determine which team was king of the class at the end. That's all it meant.
Yeah.
And by using this element of randomness, it seemed to make his whole system like incredibly more effective. People were the kids are really motivated to get those dice so that they can roll the dice, and they still wanted to win, but they really wanted to roll the dice as well.
Yeah.
So they really wanted to get the points to roll the dice, right? And he would just do stuff like the first table that looks ready at the start of class, they'll get 3 dice. The second table get 1 dice, and then no one else gets anything. And ready means that like you're sat up straight, book on the table, hands on your lap, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So, it got to the point where he would come in and they'd just be like running to the table, boom, ready, bag everything out and just doing it super quick because they want those 3 dice. They want those 3 dice,
Yeah.
So that was a very effective way of using it. And I wouldn't be surprised if he wrote a book about it at some point because he did that with every class. He had that system in place.
That's
And it
perfect.
got to the point where there was kind of if you actually saw the way that he did it, it's like the point system would be going on all the time, but just by the first time you see it, it would seem really complicated because there was so much going on. Like someone would answer a question and he'd suddenly put these dots on the board and you're like, what the hell? And later on he'd explain, oh yeah, the dots are 1 point, the diamonds are 5 point. It was like it was all there, and the kids knew it because they'd been doing it every class. But you as an outsider were like, what is going on? And then suddenly someone gets a pen and they're rolling a dice. It doesn't necessarily need to say anything. It just happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just it's a tool, and it's just there's a lot of inherent psychology involved with it. We're kind of built for this, especially kind of like the random rewards, whatever. It reminds me of like stuff that you see in casinos. What it reminds me of, was it EA that had games where they had chests or something like that you pay for the chest and it randomly spews out some item or something like that.
That was his inspiration. Loot boxes, they're
Loot
called.
boxes, yes.
And that's what he always used to talk about. He always used to mention about the loot, like using loot boxes in the classroom.
So what he did, he was utilizing it for good. He was utilizing it to get these children, I presume they were children, these students, to learn to, one, probably behave in class or be managed in class, and also to learn something through his teaching, and then eventually at the end of the term or whatever, they would have acquired a certain amount of knowledge, skills, whatever. So that would be beneficial to their life, rather than these loot boxes where you get an item in a video game, and that doesn't, you get an endorphin rush or whatever chemical you get, but ultimately it does not benefit you in the long term as a person. You don't get any value that you can put out into the world in terms of like some sort of physical fitness, some sort of knowledge, or some sort of skill that can be utilized by society. You get an item that could be good or bad, that you can use possibly in a game. Most likely it's something that your character can wear.
Yeah, exploitative purposes.
Yeah.
You're talking about in-game aesthetics, wearables. Yeah, it can be exploitative. I mean, that could be one of the criticisms of it, but ultimately, I guess lots of things can be exploitative. I mean, just the very fact of being a teacher can very easily be exploitative.
Mm-hmm.
People trust what you say, so you can say stuff that's nonsense, and people will start to believe it.
Yeah.
For example, as an English teacher, you could teach people that a chair is actually called a banana. But so anything could be exploitative or negative.
I heard about someone that was, I think it might have been on a Reddit thread, so I'm not sure how believable it actually is, where some parent was there was a divorce, and they got divorced, and this person got, kind of caught up with child abuse charges because they were teaching their kids the name of things, but telling them the wrong name for things, and it was causing the kid confusion at school and shit
deliberately,
like that.
or
Deliberately, yeah.
Oh,
like you say, a chair, we call that banana, and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that
it depends on the context of whether it was just supposed to be a little joke, or whether it was like a really orchestrated process of telling someone all these wrong names for stuff with a malicious intent, because obviously they're very different things. Like telling someone this chair's called a banana, and then later the joke comes out, ha ha, it's a chair. Oh, ho, ho, ho. That's one thing. But then kind of Machiavellian style overlord manipulation, where you're trying to redefine or trying to distort someone's reality, that's definitely abuse.
Yeah. It's a very fine line. With parenting, a lot of the time I find myself going, kind of wanting to do those kind of jokes, but then going, I need to be responsible. Maybe not. Because like you kind of realize that ultimately you are the ultimate responsible person in this little person's life. So you're just like, shit. Because and other people will make jokes and do stuff like that, and you're just like, but if everyone does that, then where is that going to leave the kid? So
probably becomes like the real life Joker or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Why no smile?
Yeah, you're like, God damn it.
Yeah, I see what you mean, man. Wow, that's stressing me out just hearing that, being that I'm someone who very much likes to act silly. Yeah,
no, I still like silly. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, you do,
but
actually.
But he does, yeah, very much. But we've got in the habit of going, "Are you tricking?" You will say, "Are you tricking me?" And I will always say, "Yes, I am tricking you."
Oh, I see.
But there are
so
times
you're
where,
setting him up to be the next Descartes. Then is anything real, or is it all a delusion?
But I can't lie about that. So there is kind of like, at least he's going around questioning things, and he does get a modicum of truth. So But you know, you gotta have fun at some with it at some time. Well, I guess you
Yeah,
got to.
well,
I don't know.
obviously, yeah. No, I think so. I mean, you can't
You can't
completely
be
take life seriously, can you?
reminds me of what's his name, like the guy from Kingdom, the king. You know, he's super puritanical. He's like, I can't do this. You know, he's got that weird strict diet. Do you know?
Oh,
I can't remember. His,
Alfred the
Alfred
Great.
the Great. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He's such a stickler. And I'm like,
Well, the interesting thing about Alfred the Great, I believe, is that just before he became king, he was he was a bit of a kind of a party animal.
oh
Like
right.
he sort of slept around and all kinds, and then it was kind of like
It dawned on
he
him the
he would say
responsibility.
stuff like thankfully I don't have to be king. Right. And he was the brother who was supposed to learn to read and write and all the rest of it, and he kind of did that, and then around like all happened at once, that he became king and had to grow up, and he had some like eating problem. It was kind of partly religious, but partly he had some thing where he couldn't eat rich food, so he had to
Oh,
have this
he's got
very
IBS.
diet.
Well, it's probably pretty stressful to be honest, being a king.
Yeah, and he got married, and his wife was super religious, and so everything in his life becomes suddenly this whole ascetic thing, and he really kind of took to it for one reason or another. That became his new addiction, I suppose. So then he was very much, yeah, as you say, he became associated as being like super serious and very, very temperate, like didn't indulge and all that sort of stuff.
Well, it sounds like he's almost gone through. He went through like some sort of maturation process. I think that's kind of what you do. Becoming a parent. Well, actually, no. Just because you, I think parent's not a good word because there. I like the idea of where people say a birth giver, and a caregiver. You know, because birth giver is just kind of like you just have a kid and it assumes that you've not taken any responsibility. But like if you're a caregiver, that this person is taking responsibility and trying to guide this kid and stuff like that. So I think if you were to say, oh, when you become a parent you become a little bit more mature, I don't think that necessarily means anything. But if you say, oh, this person's becoming, they're a caregiver, or the idea that people think of when they think of parents, that you become this responsible, mature person. Yeah, so it kind of sounds like he's gone through that kind of process where he's like
To the
to
extreme,
the
though,
dawn,
probably
they've
a
gone,
bit too
oh, I've
much.
got to be super responsible, but maybe taking it a bit too seriously.
Yeah.
Well, he's also, was that the time where he's kind of the head of, oh, no, he's not the head of the church, is he, at that time?
Uh,
Is he the
well,
head of the church? Is that
I think
Church of England?
effectively, yeah, he is the head of church,
Right.
because this is actually before Catholicism really took root in England. So it was like an anglicized Roman Christianity prior to Catholicism really coming in, which was William the Conqueror, 1066.
But it
And that would
wasn't.
be,
It wasn't the actual Church of England because that was later, right? That was
yeah, so the Church of England is
Henry with his
post Catholicism,
once
whereas this
divorces
kind
and
of
stuff.
Anglicanism was pre. I find it fascinating actually, because it's contemplative, and there's some unique practices you know which are obviously gone now, but they were kind of quite unique to that form of Christianity. One of them was the veneration of English saints, and people would pray to English saints. So like Saint Ethelwith, grant my family, that kind of stuff. And that all went with the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church don't like the idea of praying to saints, although they seem to be okay with praying to Mary. I think you can pray to Mary, but you can't pray to saints. So, anyway, and people have their different perspectives. And they used to have, like, they very much liked English saints. And I believe it was the king actually who normally
Was
decided
that
and said,
like
"That's a saint. That's a saint."
Saint George and David and
No, Saint George is totally. Saint George was a
who was
was a
it?
Roman who lived in Turkey.
Who
It's
was
a
the
different
traveling
story.
one?
But no, it's a bunch of saints that we don't talk about.
Oh,
But
okay.
because the thing about that pre William the Conqueror Christianity is it was basically obliterated. Like they got when William the Conqueror came in, he knocked down all the churches and built these Norman style grand churches. So the ones before that were kind of these small wooden buildings.
Oh,
We associate with like American churches being wooden, but the Anglo churches were these kind of small wooden buildings. And William the Conqueror knocked them all down and built the big stone things that we see. If you go and see an old church or old cathedral today, as in the ones that are like these grey bricks,
yeah,
you know, the ones I mean. And often they have like turrets as well and stuff like that. They
yeah,
almost look a bit castle-y.
yeah.
They're the sort of William the Conqueror ones. But
Interesting.
they kind of changed the whole process and got rid of all that earlier stuff. The other thing about the earlier stuff is there was a lot of integration with pagan practices. They did look down on the pagans, and they certainly didn't. You know, they certainly considered them heathens, but they didn't burn them at the stake or anything like that. And there was a lot more coexistence. And you know, you might have things like mistletoe in the church. Mistletoe was a holy, considered by the pagan druids as being holy, and you would have that in Christian churches and some other things which were considered a little bit more pagan. So it was a bit more of a mishmash. But again, all of that was wiped out by Catholicism.
So
And then
all
what
these
came?
old saints, like Saint Ethelwith, I think you mentioned,
Yeah,
are they still saints now, or are they kind of just being forgotten or cast aside, or how does that work
that's a
anymore?
very interesting question. I don't entirely know about that, but I'm pretty sure that different churches don't necessarily agree on saints anyway. They actually call it canon, don't they?
Yeah,
Whether a saint is canon or not. So, you know, Catholicism might disagree with Lutheranism on who saints are.
I had an
So I would
ex
say that
whose mum was a
almost
canon.
certainly some of those early English saints will not be considered sort of saints by pretty much anyone now.
Yeah.
That would almost certainly be the case. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So you are ordained, or whatever term it is, a saint, and then just because your type of Christianity is not kind of taken up, then you kind of just not really anymore, because you're kind of
Yeah.
your team kind of lost. It's
Yeah.
strange, but
Yeah.
because it's not, because it's kind of still Christianity. Oh, I don't know why I'm doing the fingers. Because it's still Christianity, it doesn't get as talked about as, say, like the old kind of polytheistic religions, like the Greek ones, and Norse and all that sort of stuff, because we kind of talk about them as kind of like fantasy, right? And we have all that folklore, but we don't really have. I've never heard of Ethelwith, and I think that's probably because it's kind of still tied up with the church.
Well,
Uh, it's not
it's worthwhile
differentiated.
considering that, you know, being a saint is just a human denomination.
Yeah.
There's nothing there's nothing necessarily magical or special about saints according to, you know, the Bible. It's not like if you're a saint, then, you know, you have some sort of special status. It's just a recognition of someone who had a particularly holy life, or for one reason or another
Right. Is
were
there a difference
considered.
between a saint and a prophet?
Yeah, like so a saint won't necessarily prophesy, be any kind of,
Oh, they're
give any
just
kind
kind
of
of like a
prophecy.
super religious person. But then,
It's
with
just
like
someone
in
who's
religion,
recognized for their
they
religion.
pray to saints. Some
So
people
yeah, I mean
in like Latin America.
that's the interesting thing, that you could that's in some denominations you can pray to saints, and it's just the idea of praying to a recognized figure who was considered to be very religious.
Right.
That's all that is.
But necessarily get you any. It sounds terrible. Get you anything, because this person is just
Well, I mean, it
is just
could.
kind of like a religion, a really
It's
person
just
that's
like
really
anything
good at
else.
religion, but
You know, I mean,
they're not kind of a deity, so they can't provide you with anything. You know, like there'd be a difference between me praying to Dionysius. I presume I would get something from him, rather
well,
than a saint.
yeah.
Because the
So,
saint's
well,
just
it depends. We're getting into really
I
deep
don't know
issues.
what happened with this conversation. This is no. I kind of feel so. I've still got stuck in that gamification mindset. So I'm kind of like going, wait, hold on.
What's the benefit?
What can I do with that? How does the point
payoff?
system work with this religion?
Where's the payoff? Where's the payoff? How can I maximize my gain?
You know what? I think we can bring this together, because I actually think that a lot of religion does have aspects of gamification to it, in that, you know, like you do certain actions, and those certain actions eventually are supposed to get you into, you know, heaven or something like something equivalent to that, which is not something that, you know, you may or may not be may have, but like we talked about earlier, by going through, maybe you're just a shit person and you need religion to kind of like go, oh, actually, maybe you should be nice to these other people, or maybe you should help out in the community, and you just don't feel like it, but you're like, shit, I really want to get into heaven, so I'm going to do all this nice stuff and be part of the community and be a good member. And then, you know, isn't that just the same of kind of a person that's just a good person that does it? Even then, they're like,
Well, I don't think. First of all, I don't think that religion is unanimous on saying that it's kind of a point-based system of being a good or a bad person to get somewhere.
Yeah,
I think there are definitely different perspectives on that. First of all, talking about the old Nordic traditions, I don't think they necessarily have anything about
well, they got
that
Valhalla,
kind of
right?
morals. Well,
Well,
I'm not entirely certain that Valhalla was. I'm not sure that Valhalla was the same thing as sort of heaven.
Or was that Avalon? Was that Avalon?
Yeah, maybe.
Oh no, that was British.
And the other thing is the values of those gods were not necessarily about being a good person. As you said, you mentioned valor and stuff like that. So it was different sorts of value structures. Then you have like the Roman gods and the Greek gods, who were almost like tricksters, kind of playing games all the time and tricking each other and all kinds. And it was like they were just playing games with humanity. Occasionally they would give a blessing, and occasionally they'd give a curse or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, going on to Christianity, you know, there are some schools of Christianity, such as, I don't know a lot about it, but I believe the Jehovah's Witnesses have this kind of idea of a point-based system, where like the more you contribute, the better kind of reward you have or whatever. Then other denominations of Christianity, such as the one that I'm most familiar with, it actually, as far as I understand it, it actually doesn't matter what you do, good or bad. Ultimately, the only important thing is that you have that mindset of asking for forgiveness from God. That's it.
Really?
Yeah. And there's the example in the Bible of there's a really terrible guy who lives a terrible life and has never believed in God or anything like that. And he ends up being the thief who's crucified next to Jesus. And he's kind of having a conversation with him. I think he starts by sort of mocking him or something. Oh, you're the son of God, are you? Well, how come you've ended up here as well? Something like that. And then he just kind of has a moment where he says, yeah, I think Jesus responds to him in a certain way. And then he kind of has a moment where he says, actually, I do think you're the son of God, and I'm sorry for the things I've done. And Jesus responds saying, you'll have a place beside me in heaven. And that's it. And this guy has just done one thing, but in his whole life, he led this terrible life. So that there isn't necessarily in that denomination of Christianity, there's no idea.
That's a different one, because then wouldn't you be that guy? Well, that was the whole problem, wasn't it, back in the day, why Catholicism got kind of like not destroyed, but
Criticized
really
by
criticized, because they were
particularly
literally,
Lutheranism.
people were literally paying, their priests.
Indulgence, they
Yeah,
called it.
yeah.
Yeah, you paid money for
Oh,
your
hold on.
sin.
So does that mean that if you're just like a general, I'm just a good guy, but you don't ask for forgiveness, that you'd still, go, you
To a
wouldn't
bad
go
place.
to a bad, or the whatever it is, that's not the place that you get if you ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, is it? And
Yeah,
also, what the place is that you go to. People in modern times say hell, but I think
probably back here.
the reading of the
Whole.
Bible is, yeah, exactly. I mean, it could be depending on your belief and interpretation. And there's many different ways that you could interpret the Bible, because there's also ideas of what about people who never even get exposed to the Bible or Christianity, or what happens to them. And again, there's different perspectives on it.
Yeah,
For me,
babies, children.
I kind of think, look, we're coming at this from a very human perspective, and one of I mean, just to name one particular thing which is very human about our experience is time.
Yeah,
So, if we're to conceive of a kind of a being of, let's say, infinite knowledge or power or whatever,
yeah.
then that being would not, time would be just a sliding scale that you can just move wherever you want. It's not like you're living in a time-based world.
Yeah,
We
it's
are living in a
it's a
time-based world because we're,
construct,
we're
really.
restricted in that way. It's just a dimension that, as it happens, we can only move one direction in. But there are creatures which have also limitations like that we look at and we kind of think, oh, they're limited in that way, but we're not. And if there was a greater being that lived outside of that, then they wouldn't be limited by that. So to talk about things like, well, why not just live a terrible life and at the end of it ask for forgiveness and you get everything? Or what about the person who lives a great life and never asks for forgiveness? I think that those sorts of questions, I think it's very difficult to understand those from a human perspective, because we have many limitations, of which time is one of them, where it's very difficult for us to be able to analyze that from outside of the box. So for me, it's all about where you are now, how you are now, and what you want to, what is your path and your journey right now. And you sort of go from there. I take things from a very subjective level, and I don't think it's necessarily useful to put time in there to think about, oh, well, in 10 years' time. I mean, on a spiritual level, I don't think it's necessary. Obviously, in real life, we desperately need to think about time a lot. It's really important. But I mean, if you want to think outside the box, outside of life and pragmatic concerns, then I think you should let go of the idea of time. And a lot of religions consider that, don't they? Like Buddhism as well. It's kind of like, if you're sitting to meditate, don't think about what you will attain, but just focus on that meditation in that moment and let go of the of what you think might happen in the future.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that that is just the present. Ultimately, like this very moment that you and I are talking. And even people that are watching and listening to this, when you're watching and listening to this is the present that you're experiencing, even though this is recorded in the past. Your experience is in the present. It does get kind
so
of
well done for listening. Here's 10 points. You can transfer those points to 2 dice rolls at the end of our class today. And remember, whoever gets the most points will win a free bottle of Coke Zero
and a cuddly toy
and a Neil plushie.
I do think our little tangent onto religion does kind of illustrate. We can kind of find these kind of point system light in more or less every aspect of lives. Like I said before, it seems to be an inherent psychological thing that we have.
It's massive in religion. Because as well, there is also the idea that if you're doing it for the point system, is it actually valid or not? And this
Yeah.
was a big thing about Pascal. And
Hmm.
there's a famous thing called Pascal's wager, where Pascal says, look, the potential downside of not kind of believing in God is so bad that you might as well believe in God. So he was kind of arguing that from a gambler's standpoint,
Hmm.
it makes no sense not to believe in God because it could potentially be really, really bad, right? And if you believe in God and you get rewarded for that, then it could be really, really good. So everyone might as well just believe in God and live like that, and then you could potentially win really well. And if you turn out to be wrong, well, it didn't really cost you that much. But then a lot of religious scholars came along and said, yeah, but if you use that reasoning to believe in God, that's not really believing in God, so you don't get the
Yeah.
reward. So there's kind of like, there's that, it comes back to that argument of, if someone's doing something just for the points,
Yeah.
then should they really get the benefit?
Well, it's the difference between the reason and faith, really, isn't it? You can't you they're arguing that it's like you shouldn't be believing it just because it's logical to be believing in it. It should be just something that you believe. You should have faith that it's correct. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a very tricky. It's a tricky subject.
I think this is the deepest we've gone with a crumbs on the sheets. I think we're picking out some crumbs from underneath the mattress at this stage.
These crumbs have crumbs.
Hoovering up the crumbs underneath the bed.
But can we bring it back to gamification then, in the classroom? Overall, I would say, because we're doing it in the classroom, and I think we're doing it with the intention of, generally, I think two parts, in my experience, is to have a classroom that's managed well, and therefore safe, and also that by going through this gamification and them getting points and yada yada, that they will get a reward that's based around this point system, but also at the end of the road they will get an intrinsic reward which comes from the learning that they've gone through as part of this gamification. So, be that for ourselves, a better understanding or ability, skill to utilize a language, or whatever it is that they're in this classroom for. And the downside to it would be mitigated by that eventual intrinsic reward and the overall safety of the classroom. I don't know. I'm trying to put a cherry on this.
I think that for me, gamification definitely has a place. Can't get rid of it completely. No need to get rid of it completely.
I think the question is,
But
do you need to introduce it straight away? I think maybe is it something you just keep in your toolbox in case they're not already intrinsically motivated, or they're coming from a place where they're like, I don't really want to be doing this.
I think there's an argument for that. I just think you have to be a little bit careful because, as I'm sure most people will agree, if you get off on the wrong foot with classroom management, it's a lot more difficult to correct a class than it is to establish it well in the first place.
Yeah, like my examples with my kids with the feeding and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's difficult. It's more difficult to change
You can't
something
put the
established
toothpaste back
rather
in
than
the
to
tube.
establish something new. I mean, I remember in the past when I messed things up with classes and it just wasn't working. I really just wanted to get a new class. I was just like, oh, I can't wait till like the new term and maybe I'll get a new class and then I don't need to deal with these anymore. And the thing is, a new teacher coming in can establish a new thing.
Yeah.
So a change of teacher can actually be sufficient for someone to be able to come in and change the expectation. But for you to do it, it becomes very difficult then. Very
Yeah, I
difficult.
think that would be an interesting topic for another crumbs on the sheets of how to correct the ship when it's off course, and is it possible, how to do that, yada yada. But
That's a
what I
really
would
tough
like
one. Yeah.
to hear from people listening, watching out there is their thoughts on gamification. Do you use it? Do you agree with us? Is it exploitative? Is it good for the students? Do you know best? Let us know in the comments below. Send us an email at ELT under the covers, and we'll leave it with Rich to kind of give us that spicy yet succinct and super insightful final comment.
Mm. So I guess if we go back to what we said, that there is some utility to this because it's kind of like the carrot that leads people to whatever destination you want them to go to. And that destination might well be that they discover the intrinsic motivation of something. So if gamification is the carrot and we accept that there is some utility in having a carrot, that is, having something that is not the thing itself, which leads you there, so then that establishes it as a habit, then really, could we just replace gamification with something else, another carrot? And let's take it to an extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that we had basically something that was akin to cocaine, which give you the reward sense.
Is it actually just cocaine?
Super high, yeah, or something similar to that give you the reward sense of cocaine, but just briefly, very quickly,
Yeah.
just a quick zap of a reward.
Uh-huh.
Then are we getting to the point where if we had the technology, rather than gamification, do we just have all that plugged into the students' heads, and when they do the right thing, they get the blast of the, oh yeah, I did it? Because that's actually essentially what it is. They're getting dopamine dumps from wanting to roll the dice and winning and losing, and that's actually what it is. It's a dopamine system response.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have just the synthetic thing that gives a dopamine hit, right? I remember we had a friend, Vasily, in Sheffield, and he hypothesized a training device which was the other way, actually, which was when you didn't. No, actually, he did talk about this. He talked about this in terms of if there was it could inject a drug if you did what you wanted to do, and if you didn't do it or you did it badly, then it would give you a little electric shock. And there's been experiments with that, isn't there, in the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, the behavioralists, yeah.
Right, behaviorists. So is that the ultimate direction of it? And if that is the ultimate direction of it, and we do have a problem with that, why don't we have a problem with gamification? And if
So
we
the
don't
opposite
have a
side.
problem with gamification, and it does get to the point that we get the cocaine bracelet, that when the kids come into the room and they sit up straight, they get the dung. Ah, yes, I'm sitting up straight, you know. And oh well, they're not going to need it eventually, because eventually they'll realize that sitting up straight is its own reward. If we accept that, then are we comfortable with that potential future?
Maybe it's just the case because this is something that we didn't really bring up was, when you first start learning a language, and you learn, for example, a few words, hello, how are you, I'm good, and the students go out there and use that in the world, and they're like, they get that little bit of dopamine rush. So maybe, like if your curriculum was better structured to constantly release those without the like by doing really micro graded, so that each time students say hello and they're like, oh, someone said hello back to me, yeah, I get that, and then the next thing is something a little bit more difficult, and then that allows them to do something else, ask for something and they get given something back, and then do it in a way where it's not too no, because they never deal with the real world in that way. Forget that. Cocaine bracelets, that's the way to go.
Potentially. potentially. Or, you know, if we just hypothesize that gamification theory becomes so complex that we have it down to essentially something that's equatable to a cocaine bracelet.
Yeah.
Because our gamification is so good that they just want that reward. And obviously this is what games developers are trying to do with those horrible pay-to-play loot box mobile games, of which my wife is currently addicted to. You play
Mine
Gardenscape, shout out if you want to sponsor us, go right ahead and we'll get a testimony from my wife. She's currently level 1,256 or something.
Do you know what? I actually had this discussion with Fanny, and I was like, look, if you're gonna do these dopamine games, you know, that are exploitative, you should look for ones that at least you get rewards. So she does these, you know, games where, you know, they're loot boxes and bingo and whatever she does. Candy Crush or whatever, but at the end, for a certain amount of playtime, she gets points, and those points can be converted into Amazon gift cards. So she's actually okay with continuing games but now she does them a bit more. Now she's like, I need to do the games to get the Amazon gift cards.
Oh no!
Like, oh no!
I would be.
You spend 10 hours where you could to get a £10 Amazon gift card. I'm like, you're basically working for below minimum wage.
It definitely rings alarm bells for me when games try to link it to real life rewards like that, and vice versa.
Yeah.
If you're paying real money for something in the game, or you're working in the game for something in like a real money, basically, either of those situations, I don't really want to go near games like that, because you know they're going to be exploitative.
Yeah.
Of course they are, because they want you to play the game as much as possible, to see all the ads, so that you do it for your synthetic reward, which obviously isn't going to be worth it. Because if it was worth it, the games developer wouldn't make any money.
Yeah. They'll probably still make it. They'll probably, for that every Amazon £10 Amazon gift voucher that she gets.
Oh, they're making at least
probably,
£1,000 in ad revenue for sure.
Yeah. Ah, God, there's so much. It's so, we could go so much deeper with this, but we're gonna have to wrap it up. So
I think it's a good place to leave it.
Yeah. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. And you know, if you want to come on the show, drop us a line at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com, or check out eltunderthecovers.com for more details. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
If you're looking for more information from myself, you can go to teamteacherchina.com. We've got a whole bunch of materials, PowerPoints that you can use instantly in the classroom. We've got a Team Teacher China YouTube channel where we have videos teaching you how to use those materials. Team Teacher English, where we put those materials into a video form for self-study. And Team Teacher Baby, where I take my experience as a teacher and put that into parenting.
And go to youtube.com/ProfRich to see some English teaching. You can catch me weekly live streams on Oxford Online English YouTube channel. Oh, and also you can do a YouTube search for POG space UK, and you would get my alpha version of my new gaming channel, which actually just have some trial content on there at the moment. You can email us here at eltunderthecovers@gmail.com if you have anything you'd like to contribute to the show.
Smash that like button, share and subscribe.
And watch 100% of the video and don't click off. Thank you.
Bye.